Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kim Barrett Show. I am your host, Kim Barrett, and on today's episode, we are joined by Mr. Matt Ryder, CEO of Sales Snipers. If you're someone who's wanting to be growing your sales, improving your sales skills, this is the episode for you. You will not want to miss it. Matt goes into a couple of different strategies and tactics, some key metrics. So if you're a business owner wanting to grow a sales team, we've got you covered there as well. And of course, if we can ever help you with your marketing, just head over to our Facebook group, www.joinmygroup.com.au, where we have everything you need and more. But until then, let's jump into the show. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you making the time.
No worries. Thanks for the introduction.
Oh, of course, man. You know how I do.
Yeah.
Now, I always like to ask the same question at the start of every podcast, which is, if I met you at a party, we're having a few drinks, and I said to you, Matt, what is it that you actually do? What's your go-to answer?
We know how some business owners, maybe they struggle, I guess, to kind of connect that whole sales and marketing piece. So what I do is I kind of, I guess, help them, take the burden of responsibility from that sales process off so they can focus on their true area of genius.
Nice. I like that. It's almost like you're in sales. That was pretty smooth.
It's almost like I've written that out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You practiced that once before.
Well, the 2 Comma Club thing, whatever it's called, Funnel Hackers Live is coming up. So I gotta be fucking throwing out. I'm just gonna be throwing out business cards like it's going out of fashion, right?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah.
I love that. Easy. And so, how did you get into that? Because obviously, a lot of people I've got to assume that most young kids, when they're in school, don't go, when I grow up, I want to be a salesman. Like, what was your journey to getting into, the world of sales, world of marketing, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, I'm definitely not into the world of marketing at the levels that you are, but I think in terms of sales, it just became a mechanism of, I enjoy 2 things. One is eating, and the second is having a roof over my head. And so I was in a position where those things were in jeopardy, and I needed to leverage a skill set that I had, which is like communicating and talking. I've always been a talker. I think that comes back from when I was a kid. I went to 11 different schools. I lived in a new house. The longest I've ever lived in a house was 3 years. It's ever in my entire life. So I was always the new kid. And so I had to kind of develop a quick wit and a good ability to talk to people. I was not good at selling, but I had an acumen for communication. And so when I sort of transitioned that into I actively sort of said, okay, I'm now someone who does sales a fair bit. Then I was able to kind of translate that, and over a period of years, through looking at it in a fairly analytical way, become proficient enough at it to where I could do it full time. And
what was the transition from being proficient at it enough to do it full time? Was that when you were good, or when did you become to the point where you're actually able to? Because there's a difference between being good at sales and being able to put a roof over your head and eat, and being able to grow an actual income, build wealth and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. So I was working for a guy that we both know, TJ, selling gym memberships. And that's a really, really great grounding in sales, because it's high volume, highly emotional, low ticket. So there's little pressure to close every individual deal. Whereas if you're closing a business coaching package and it's $30,000 or $10,000, whatever, but it costs $400 to get the person on that call, that's a lot of money. So if you close 1 in 5, that's $2,000, plus you have the audacity of demanding 20% comms, and do you know what I mean? And then from there, okay, that's another 1,000. So now it's $3,000 to get that person to buy, and you're only making 5, take away tax. You're not making any money, right? So you have to be really proficient. So it's a very high stress kind of environment when you're walking into that. And I think that's why a lot of people don't do well in the beginning, because they're starting there. But I had the lucky, I accidentally became the sales guy for that business because no one else was doing it. And so I sort of went, well, I'll just do it. Right. So got the opportunity, and I was dialing leads. And if you would have asked me at that time if I was a salesperson, I would have said no. I would have said I'm a trainer, but I was literally calling leads 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's all I did. And so from there, I sort of realized at the end of it, oh, I'm a sales guy. And then when I left that business, I went back to my other business because I'd left, like we sort of split, but it was like we did it on purpose, and he was holding down here and I was holding down here, and we both had a vested interest in both. When I came back to that other business, the guy goes, "Oh, I've been running it without you for years. Like, if you fucking come back, I'm going to fire everybody." I was like, Jesus. Right. So I was like, oh, okay. So anyway, like sort of negotiated an exit, like a fairly modest one from that business, but it gave me kind of enough time to where I sort of had some level of security. Not a lot, like it still wasn't enough to pay my bills, but it was enough to where I didn't go massively backwards. And that's when I started just like, I didn't really have much to fall back on. I had a second baby on the way, and I was in a house that was very expensive to live in because I live in Sydney in the eastern suburbs. Like it was $6,000 a month rent. I was probably making $10,000 a month total. Right. So like I wasn't making enough to pay tax and all that kind of stuff. Right. So we were barely scraping by. And I just started cold calling gyms and kind of doing my thing. And I think like I was an okay sales guy at that point. I was good compared to most in the space, but I was not a good salesperson, I would say. I just had an acumen for it. And then over the course of like, I guess making the active decision to be a full-time salesperson, and then sort of taking all that stuff and doing everything in the way that I needed to do it to make a success out of it. Like that's where I started to systemize and process myself. And then I guess make that transition to a sales professional. And then from there, learn the skills to be what I would consider like top 1% kind of sales rep.
And now being that you're not just a sales gun for hire and offering your services out there, you also are a business owner and whatnot as well. Like for the business owners out there listening and watching this as well, what level of proficiency do they need to get to, do you think, if at all, before they start to bring on a sales team? Like what's your view on the entrepreneur in a business who maybe has started doing some sales, maybe they're being somewhat successful? Like how proficient do they need to get themselves?
I think sales is a skill that no matter what you do in life, it's very good. Do I think you should go down the deep, dark rabbit hole and start kind of paying $50,000 for one-on-one sales? Probably not, right? It's probably not the move. As much as I love selling that stuff, it's probably not the move for most business owners. They just need to get good enough to where they can create consistency in their front end. And that's the biggest thing that I think stops a lot of businesses from growing, is that they never figure out how to get a consistent front end. And it's not an easy nut to crack. I think it has to be like on the forefront of your mind, like not growing. It's like, how do you know what's coming in always? And then from there, you can start to make decisions to grow the business. But it's like most businesses, they hit an inflection point where they're doing the marketing, the sales, and the delivery, and the admin and the finances. And so it's like you need to make a decision as to what you're going to hand off and when, and at what parts you do that. So like for me, the last thing I handed off was sales. Because I'm good at it, like, you know, for you, if you were to go back, the last thing you would stop is doing the marketing. Like that'd be like, you know, I mean, that would be ridiculous. So, so it's like hand off small things, and then you'll hit a point where hopefully you've handed off some of the admin, and some of the finance stuff with people who actually know what they're doing in that space. And then you'll hit a point where it's like delivery, sales, marketing. And those are the three things. And this is very much coaching and consulting space, but I think that's probably an agency space, which is, I think, where most of the people who are in this realm are. And that's where I am and where you are. And so that's when you go, if I want to be the sales guy, then I can go hard in the paint sales, but it means I can't be the delivery guy. Right? You can't really do both effectively, especially not at scale. So it's just like, if you plan on going the sales route, then be a savage salesperson. If you plan on like outsourcing that, then get it to a point where you're consistent. There's somewhat of a system, and knowing that that person's only going to be able to ever replicate maybe 60% of what you could do. Because even a good sales guy, it's difficult to replicate what the business owner did, because it's a different process entirely. It's almost like you might as well not give them sales recordings and a script, because what you're able to do versus what a sales rep is able to do when you're the guy on camera is chalk and cheese.
And with that as well, obviously, as you mentioned, like finding the next person to come on and help you with sales. I've seen a lot of people struggle with this, like getting that next person on. And as you say, obviously there's expectation management around what they're going to be able to suffice. But being that now you've grown some pretty big teams in the world of sales, and because you guys obviously sell your own stuff, you do services where you do it for people, all that fun stuff. Why do you think some people struggle to find salespeople? Are they just not putting them through the right sort of training, or where do you think the big fall down is for most businesses?
I think, like, to be honest, it's lack of patience and unrealistic expectations. That's why, like, I recommend, it depends on the level of business, right? But if there's someone who's a proven element who's in there, like, let's say it's you, the business owner, then you shouldn't stop selling when you bring on a sales guy. Right. And you should have a gradual buildup where that person has an opportunity to fail without dramatic consequences. Right. And so I think what's wrong is when you go, here's the sales. And because everyone hates doing sales. Right. So they want to hand it over. So they do it in an unrealistic fashion. And it's not common that you can get a salesperson that can just come in and start selling straight away. I have maybe 3 guys that can do that in the whole company of all the 100 sales reps that I have that I know can walk in and immediately sell. And they're unicorns. Like, it's me, Marco, Anthony, and Jeff, right? Are probably the 3 guys, or Yash as well, probably. So 5, right? Are guys that I know, no matter where I put them, they'll figure it out in probably 4 or 5 calls, and then they'll start making sales, right? But those are like, I call them unicorn reps, and they're very difficult to replicate. And if your business has one and you don't identify it, you're kind of screwed because you'll think your marketing is way better than what it is, right? Which is a real problem. So I think it's like they bring on salespeople too quickly. They try and do it. Like, I don't own like a recruiting company, but like, if I would probably recommend going to a recruiter, because like, you'll have an element of like, there should be some sort of guarantee behind it. Like, okay, like this is a product that you're buying, you know, it's a person, but you're sort of buying a product and it will come with a certain level of like guarantee. Like, we do some placement, but we don't do a lot of it because we have our own accounts. But like having something like that where there's a system they can plug into, and then make sure that there's a methodology behind the sales, and don't pigeonhole. Like, the salesperson should have a methodology, right? But like, you can't force your guy to sell in a particular way, right? Like I'm obviously very NEPQ based, Jeremy Miner stuff. That's how I like to sell. But like, if someone came in and they were killing it and they were using like Thor's style or whatever it was, like, I'd be like, oh, you're killing it. Like, why would I stop you from doing that? But there seems to be, from what I've seen, because I deal with a lot of sales reps, like, they get pigeonholed into a very particular way of selling because they think that this is how you sell this account. And it's like, well, no, that's how those people have sold the account. But there's sort of different ways to skin the cat. And every individual, like, for example, like someone like me and you, let's say we use like Gulliver's style, phenomenal for someone like me and you. We can alpha and slap. Like, wah, bah, 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 right? Just stay in the cage and just rumble with people, and I find it fun, right? But if you take like a 21-year-old sort of more calm, like smaller, you know, physically and emotionally kind of smaller human being, they just won't pull it off, and they'll come off like an idiot, and it just won't play, right? So getting them to sell that way is kind of silly. So you kind of have to allow the person to develop a style, and then, like, you know, have an underlying methodology, but kind of allow them to like give them the time and the space to, and the respect to be able to kind of go and take that and grow with it. But that takes time, you know what I mean? And a lot of business owners, like, they're just in a hurry. And I think those self-imposed time frames are nothing but like detrimental in the overall.
And so let's say if a business owner's got someone on, they have given them a good time frame, and they are building someone up, and they're being patient. Like, what are the metrics that you look for that show average, good, great? Like, what do you kind of look to identify from a salesperson?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's very, very account specific and almost industry specific. Like if you take like BizOp, right? Like let's say someone who's selling like e-com stores to people who want to transition out of a 9 to 5. Like if you're selling that at like 30%, you're a rock star, like straight up bona fide rock star. But like in a coaching and consulting program, like where they're sort of being nurtured and it's warm audience stuff, like I think you should be doing better than that. You know what I mean? But I think like the key is like setting a baseline of activity. So because everyone's kind of going to graduate, so it's hard to say like a close rate, you know what I mean? But you can have certain metrics. Like for me, I like to have a 50% cash to contract ratio. So like I incentivize my sales team to collect 50% cash, right? So they get a bonus if they do that, right? We also have like targets, like specific targets for them to hit. So like if I have a look at like 7th level, which I own, which is my coaching business, right? So, and I also do this for Sales Sniper and everything else is like I have my projections for the next 2 years based on like what I think is a reasonable, somewhat aggressive, but not over the top outlandish kind of projection. And then my whole team, all like the key leadership people are like, that's their goal. And so like they get remunerated when that goal is hit. So it's like every month, if we hit projection, they get a bonus, which helps the whole team kind of work together. And in the same way where like we have cash collection bonuses, we have PIF bonuses, we have like cash collection to contract value bonuses, and we have hitting revenue target bonuses. So that means that like we remunerate the entire team based off coming together under a common goal, which I think is super important because then you have like a collaborative yet competitive environment, but it's not like a gross competitive environment where everyone's just like, you know, trying to vie for bullshit, but you're kind of remunerated on a team. So I would say for setters, you definitely want activity, right? Like for our guys, if they're doing outbound dialing, it's a minimum $100 a day, right? That's a minimum, with the hope to do about 200. But obviously conversation rate's going to dictate a lot of that, right? So they should be doing 100 outbound. Now, if they have maybe 20 calls and 20 pick up and they have 20-minute conversations, it's going to be a different story. But in general, that's what we're looking for. From there, we'll set a baseline over a 3-month period. So I don't really set many KPIs for the first 3 months. And then we set that first 3 months as the baseline of dials to pickups to conversations to bookings to show up to conversion to sales call if we're doing that, and then show up to sales call conversion. And then I track all the objections and stuff like that. So if we can set that as a baseline, then we can go, okay, for this particular account, that's the baseline. And then it's like, so all of our KPIs are going to be based on that. And then we'll reassess them every quarter and we'll just bump those numbers up. If it's getting easier and easier to hit the KPIs, then it's like, okay, cool. Then we need to kind of bump them up a little bit until we hit kind of an inflection point where it's like, okay, if we do this, we know that we have a predictable revenue from that particular source of leads or whatever it may be. Right. Because like, for example, like I would never have the same metrics for Facebook group leads as I would for Instagram leads. Right. Like IG leads just are not as good. Right. There's a shitload of them. Right. You know what I mean? Like TikTok leads, Jesus, mate, like they're just like, I mean, TikTok's clearly trying to take market share. Right. So like, they're just giving you cheap leads, you know, like that's the way I look at it. So you might as well make hay while the sun shines, but they're cheap as shit and they're terrible. So it's like having the same metric for both is kind of silly. So it's like, well, I don't know what the metrics are going to be for TikTok. So let's just let it ride for 3 months, 2 months. And then from there, we'll look back, go over the data, and then we'll figure out what we could be doing better. Like what can we fix from a process? What can we fix from a skill? And what is just the nature of the beast? Like a podcast lead, you're going to close them every time, you know? Yeah. So like, I don't need the same metrics, you know? So it's a really difficult, it's one of those questions. It's like, the more you know, the more difficult that question becomes to answer. Whereas if you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, you go, oh, 30% close rate. You're like, well, okay. You know? So the more I dive into it, the more difficult those questions become to answer and the more nuanced they become, because like I'm in the back end of like 35 different 7 and 8 figure businesses now. And I've seen like there just is no cookie cutter when it comes to doing this correctly. And I think with time, they can all be figured out. It's just whether or not you can be afforded the time.
And like in those first 90 days when you're collecting that data for obviously the individuals coming through as well, are there specific red flags that you've noticed where you're like, obviously you've got the balance of giving that person time, energy, and effort, and then there's like red flags where you're like, you should probably cut them a bit earlier. Is there anything that's kind of stand out for you that you've seen, whether it be from like attitude perspective or from a deliverable perspective?
Okay, so the way that I do it is I put everyone through a boot camp before they start selling. So I run a boot camp once a month. We do a setter boot camp, and then the next month we do a closer boot camp, and we just flop like that, right? They pay like $1,000, so I have like a barrier to entry to even apply to work on one of our accounts, right? And we've just been able to do that because we can do that. So not that it's super replicatable, but it used to be free. So we have like a 4-week period where like they go through and we set targets for them. I recommend everyone do like an audition period, right? Where there's no base, then you have them like generate their own. Like here's a list, right? Go through outbound, dial, book calls. I don't expect you to create much, but I expect you to give it a red hot crack, right? And anyone who says like, it's like, well, fucking beat it. Do you know what I mean? Unless you've gone after them specifically because you know they're a savage, then it's a different story, right? But like, so I'll just set activity goals and I'll be like, hey, here's a list of leads, just go for it. You know what I mean? And then like they're batting cleanup, they're doing follow-ups, they're just doing activity-based stuff because like I want to see who wants to be there, you know? And so I'll do that, and then I have a cultural interview as well, right? So we have someone at the company who is specifically around hiring culture and sort of like a team dad, you know what I mean? Someone who actually is my dad, right? So his full-time job is to keep these kids on the rails. You know what I mean? But he really understands kind of what the business is and what it isn't. And he has obviously my best interest at heart. So like he has sort of an interview with people and then he just goes, hey, this is my thoughts on them, and sort of does a bit of a write-up. And you can have anyone in your organization do that. You can do it yourself and just have like hey, where do you want to be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? Like, what are your skill sets? What are your gaps? Like, what do you want to get out of this relationship besides just money? Like, what are your goals? What are your ethics? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and you can just kind of get a feel as to whether or not they're a good fit. And you can find someone who's a great salesperson, but if they're not a good fit, there's probably not much point bringing them on. You're better off getting someone who has a baseline skill set, has the correct attitude, and is a cultural fit, because that is someone who can be in your business like long term. You know, and then once you find a good place for them, then, you know, you just work with them and hopefully you can get them better and better and better. And, you know, it's a really good relationship. Like if you have a look at like, say someone like a Dan Bolton, you know, he has a great sales guy called Dallas. He's in, the reason why I know him is because he's in our training. Do you know what I mean? He was pretty average to begin with. I'm not sure if he watches this podcast, but he's a great guy, really put the effort in. Dan put him into Inner Circle, and then we trained him. And like through the law of attrition, the dude just became really good. And, you know, once you've been on an offer for 6 or 8 months and you're getting trained and you have someone who believes in you and you're given the runway, like you can become really good at selling it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And now, Matt, I could probably sit here and talk to you about sales and business and fun stuff all day, but I do want to make sure I stay on time here. So as we get towards the end of our time here together, I always like to ask the same question, which is, what's the question which I didn't ask you that I should have?
Oh, I don't know. I guess it depends. It's going to be like most valuable for your guys. Like over the last couple of years, I've managed to grow some businesses and do some things. And I would say, I think people probably have a misconception as to like what people see like the sales skill as like the core reason for it. But it's definitely not, right? And the thing that I think that set my company apart and the reason why we're able to get to multiple 8 figures is because there was a real consistency of 2 things. The one was like content, like super consistent with content. And the second was like we have a very clear core set of ethics within the business that we will not compromise for any reason. And that seeps down into the culture. Like I have teachings of how to identify someone who should not be sold. Right. Which doesn't really make any sense if you just want to sell everybody. Right. But I've learned some styles in the past of selling where it's like, just fucking sell everyone. It's like, oh, it's great. And just like, if they don't buy, they're a fucking idiot and they're, this and this and this. It's like, okay, well, first of all, like I've been broke, right? So I've been in a position where like I would have done nearly anything to do so, but I'm not going to take food out of my kids' mouths. You know what I mean? That's just crazy towns. So I think having a level of empathy for someone's position allows you to then farm them long-term and then create a great relationship and get referrals and stuff like that. But I think like having a real key, like ethical driver for your business as to how you want your business to be perceived on the outside and how you conduct yourself on the inside. I think that's really important to having a really great culture. And all the businesses that I've seen that really grow and take off, and they all have phenomenal cultures. Well, that stay anyway. There's some flashes in the pan that just kind of come in and out over the course of a couple of years. But I think like, that's a really key part. So I would say the question would be like, what is a key driver behind business that isn't sales and marketing? And I would say it's like ethics and like a really good culture where everyone can kind of get behind it and everyone is like sort of driven by the same North Star.
Beautiful.
I don't see that in many businesses. So.
Yeah. Amazing. And now, Matt, for anyone that's listened to this and they've said, look, I like the cut of this guy's jib. I want to find out more about what he's up to. Where's the best place for people to go and connect with you online?
Instagram, real Matt Ryder. No underscores. There are a bunch of fake ones selling crypto and Forex scams. And then just me on Facebook. And then you can go to salessniper.net and, or you can just say my name into your phone and I'm sure that Google will figure it out. Just say my name near TikTok and I'm sure.
Yeah. You'll get all these shirtless Matt videos. Yeah, guaranteed.
Yeah, you pay a lot for those.
Yeah. Amazing. And guys, so if you're listening to this and if you know maybe a business owner who hasn't been able to make that next step with their sales and sales process, please share this episode with them. Or if you know someone in sales, maybe they've been hitting a little bit of a rut or a lull, please share this episode with them and get some of Matt's wisdom and knowledge into their ears so they can see what they can do next. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you making the time.